Remove the robot from the competition floor. This is not where unfinished experiments belong. The words cut through the International Robotics Championship Hall like a cold blade, and for a moment, every sound disappeared. Thousands of square feet of polished steel, glass screens, and glowing machines stood beneath the bright lights of the McCormick Place Convention Center in Chicago, Illinois, but all eyes were locked on one person standing alone beside a small, homemade robot. Marcus Carter was 16 years old, wearing a simple blue hoodie, worn sneakers, and a nervous expression he tried hard to hide. His hands rested lightly on the metal frame of ARIS, the robot he had spent 3 years building from recycled parts, second-hand components, and countless nights inside his family's small Detroit garage. Across the competition floor, teams from elite engineering schools adjusted their machines with confidence. They wore matching jackets, carried university logos, and spoke with the certainty of people who had always been welcomed into rooms like this. Marcus had none of that. He had no famous school behind him, no wealthy sponsor, no company name printed across his equipment. Only a creation he believed could change the future. Richard Whitmore, the chairman of the competition board, looked at the robot with a quiet expression of disappointment. The 60-year-old technology executive had built a reputation as one of the most respected figures in the robotics industry. His gray suit, expensive watch, and calm voice represented decades of success in Silicon Valley. "Young man," Richard said, looking over the machine, "innovation requires more than imagination. It requires resources, experience, and a proven foundation." A few people nearby exchanged uncomfortable smiles. Marcus felt the weight of every glance. He had heard those words before. Not exactly the same sentence, but always the same meaning. "You are too young. You are from the wrong place. You do not belong here." One of the other competitors glanced at ARIS and whispered, "It looks like something built in a garage." The comment was quiet, but Marcus heard it. He always heard things people thought he could ignore. He lowered his eyes for a second, remembering the nights when the only light in his garage came from a small desk lamp above his workbench. He remembered his mother, Emily, bringing him a cup of hot chocolate at midnight and telling him, "A great idea does not become smaller because people refuse to see it." Marcus looked back at his robot. "It works," he said softly. Richard raised an eyebrow. "A lot of people believe their inventions work until they face real-world testing." Marcus took a slow breath. "Then let it be tested." The room became still again. The competition officials looked uncertain. The judges exchanged glances. Marcus knew the rules. Every team deserved a chance to demonstrate their technology. But when the board reviewed his application earlier that morning, they had questioned whether his project belonged among professional teams. His creation had nearly been removed before anyone even saw what it could do. "The judges have already reviewed the qualifications," Richard said. "The competition stage is reserved for serious contenders." Those words hurt more than Marcus expected, not because he wanted special treatment, but because he knew what they meant. They were not questioning the robot, they were questioning him. The boy from Detroit, the kid without a famous name, the black teenager who arrived carrying a machine instead of a reputation. Marcus slowly reached into his pocket and pulled out a small notebook filled with sketches, calculations, and handwritten designs. The pages were worn from years of use. "I understand why you doubt me," Marcus said. "But I hope you judge what I built, not where I come from." For a brief second, even Richard seemed surprised by the calmness in his voice. Then the chairman looked toward the officials. "Remove the entry from the demonstration list." A wave of silence moved through the hall. Marcus stood beside ARIS, his fingers resting on the robot's frame. The machine's small blue indicator light continued blinking, steady and patient, as if it knew something everyone else had missed. Marcus looked around the room filled with experts who had already decided his story before seeing the final page. Then he quietly stepped back. But as he turned away, nobody noticed the data screen on ARIS had already completed a self-check. The robot was ready. The world simply was not ready to listen yet. Marcus Carter walked out of the competition hall with ARIS beside him, moving through the crowded corridors of McCormick Place, while the sounds of other teams preparing for the next round faded behind him. The bright lights above reflected across the polished floor, but the excitement surrounding the robotics championship felt distant. He held the small notebook against his chest, the same notebook filled with years of sketches, calculations, and ideas that most people had never taken seriously. Outside the glass entrance, the cold Chicago wind moved through the streets, carrying the noise of buses, footsteps, and conversations from strangers who had no idea what had just happened inside. Marcus looked back once at the building. He had imagined this moment differently. He imagined experts asking questions about his design. He imagined people studying ARIS and seeing the hours, the failures, and the hope built into every piece. Instead, they had only seen a teenager standing beside an unusual machine. They had not seen the nights in Detroit when Marcus stayed awake until 2 in the morning, testing new systems in a small garage behind his house. They had not seen the old computer parts stacked neatly on shelves because he could not afford brand new equipment. They had not seen his mother, Emily Carter, working long shifts as an electronics repair technician while still finding time to encourage his dreams. 6 months earlier, that same garage had been Marcus's entire laboratory. The walls were covered with diagrams, wiring plans, and handwritten notes. The smell of metal, dust, and machine oil filled the small space. A single work lamp illuminated the corner where ARIS slowly came to life piece by piece. "You know you do not have to prove everything to everyone," Emily told him one evening as she watched him adjust a sensor. Marcus smiled slightly. "I do not want to prove I am better than them, Mom. I just want them to see what this can do." Emily placed a hand on the edge of the workbench. "Then remember something. The value of your creation does not change because someone refuses to understand it." Marcus carried those words with him everywhere. His passion for robotics began when he was younger, after watching rescue teams use technology to help people during emergencies. While other kids collected sports cards or played video games after school, Marcus studied machines. He watched engineering lectures online, read manuals from libraries, and rebuilt broken electronics just to understand how each component worked. He did not have access to a university laboratory. He did not have expensive mentors. He had curiosity, patience, and a belief that technology should solve real problems. The idea for ARIS came after Marcus saw a news report about emergency workers struggling to reach people during dangerous situations. He wondered if a machine could be designed to enter difficult environments, analyze conditions, and provide assistance before humans arrived. For years, that question became his mission. Every improvement came from trial and error. Every successful test came after dozens of failed attempts. And then came the invitation to the International Robotics Championship. Marcus knew it was a rare opportunity. The competition brought together young innovators from across the country, including students from some of the most respected technology programs in America. When he received the acceptance email, he read it 3 times before believing it was real. Emily hugged him and said, "This is your chance to let your work speak." Marcus believed her. But inside the competition hall, he discovered something painful. The world did not always judge ideas first. Sometimes it judged the person holding them. As Marcus sat on a bench outside the building, he looked at ARIS and wondered if bringing it there had been a mistake. Then the robot's indicator light blinked softly. Marcus opened his notebook again and looked at the first page. There was a sentence he had written years earlier. "Build something that helps someone who needs it." He closed the notebook and stood up. He did not know that the same technology others had dismissed would soon reveal a truth none of them expected. He did not know that someone inside that competition hall had a connection to his invention that went far beyond a simple demonstration. And he definitely did not know that the people who refused to give him a chance would soon be forced to look at his creation in a completely different way. Inside the Whitmore Technology Pavilion, the atmosphere was completely different from the quiet hallway where Marcus stood alone. The main competition floor was alive with movement, conversations, and the confidence of people who believed they already knew who belonged there. Giant screens displayed team rankings. Engineers walked between advanced machines covered with polished panels and professional branding. Every corner of the room represented years of funding, research, and opportunity. At the center of it all stood Richard Whitmore, the man whose name appeared on every major technology announcement connected to the championship. Richard had built his career believing that innovation came from structure, the right schools, the right connections, the right people. To him, a great invention was not only about the idea, it was about who created it and where they came from. Earlier that morning, before Marcus entered the demonstration area, Richard had reviewed the list of competitors. When he saw Marcus Carter's name, he paused. "Detroit?" he asked one of the organizers. "A teenager from a local program?" The organizer nodded carefully. His project passed the technical review. Richard looked at the file again. There were no university partnerships, no corporate sponsors, no famous engineers attached to the project. Only a 16-year-old inventor and a machine called A-R-E-S. Interesting, Richard said quietly, but his expression showed doubt. Let us see if it survives the real world. Richard's daughter, Sophie, sat nearby watching the competition preparations. The 10-year-old had always been fascinated by technology, especially machines designed to help people. Unlike her father, she did not care about reputation or award. She cared about whether something worked. "Dad," Sophie asked, looking at the schedule, "is the boy with the rescue robot competing today?" Richard glanced at her. "Yes, but there are many talented teams here." Sophie looked toward the entrance where Marcus had walked earlier. He looked like he really cared about it. Richard smiled slightly. "Caring is important, Sophie, but technology requires more than passion." Those words reflected everything Richard believed. He respected intelligence, but only when it came from familiar places. Over the years, he had watched young innovators enter the industry, but most came from prestigious universities, research centers, or wealthy families with access to advanced equipment. He believed those environments created excellence. He never considered that excellence could exist somewhere else. Across the hall, Marcus stood beside Emily while waiting for the final decision about his entry. His mother noticed the disappointment in his face but did not let him lose confidence. "Marcus," she said softly, "look at me." He turned toward her. "Do not let one room decide what you are capable of." Marcus nodded. "I know, Mom. It just feels like they never even looked at the robot." Emily looked at ARIS. The small machine reflected the bright lights above, every component carrying a story of patience and determination. "Then one day," she said, "they will have no choice but to look." A few minutes later, Richard returned to the stage. The audience became quiet as he announced the next round of demonstrations. Teams from California, Massachusetts, and Texas prepared their machines. Their presentations included advanced graphics, professional explanations, and large support teams standing behind them. Marcus watched from the side, holding the handle of ARIS. His turn was gone. His opportunity seemed finished, but then something unexpected happened. During a review of the competition systems, one of the judges noticed an unusual pattern in Marcus's technical notes. The information was detailed, organized, and far beyond what they expected from a high school student. The judge looked closer at the pages Marcus had submitted. There were complex calculations, emergency response models, and adaptive learning designs written in his own handwriting. "Who reviewed this project?" the judge asked. The organizer checked the records. "Only the standard evaluation team." The judge looked back at the notes. "A teenager created this?" No one answered immediately. Meanwhile, Richard continued preparing for the next stage, unaware that the opinion inside the room was beginning to shift. The same people who had dismissed Marcus were now studying the evidence they had ignored. They had judged the person before understanding the invention. They had looked at the clothes, the age, and the background before looking at the work. But technology had a way of revealing the truth. A machine did not care about a person's last name. It did not care about their neighborhood, their school, or their resources. It only responded to design, intelligence, and purpose. And soon, everyone inside the competition hall would have to answer the same question. What happens when the person they underestimated built something none of them could understand? "Wait." The judge's voice stopped the movement around the competition floor. For the first time that morning, people were not looking at Marcus Carter because of his age or his simple clothes. They were looking at the pages in his notebook. The handwritten designs, the detailed calculations, and the carefully organized testing records had created a silence that felt heavier than any applause. The same experts who had dismissed him minutes earlier were now trying to understand how a 16-year-old from Detroit had developed a system with this level of complexity. Marcus stood near the entrance of the demonstration area, holding ARIS beside him. He did not celebrate. He did not smile. He simply waited, because waiting was something he had learned to do his entire life. "Marcus," one of the judges called, "can you explain this adaptive response system?" Marcus stepped forward slowly. The large screens above him displayed his technical information. He looked smaller than the other competitors standing beneath the bright lights, but his voice remained steady. ARIS was designed to make decisions during emergency situations when information is incomplete. It learns from environmental changes and adjusts its response based on what it detects. A few engineers exchanged looks. The explanation was simple, but the technology behind it was not. Richard Whitmore watched from the front row, his expression unchanged. He had spent decades listening to ambitious inventors explain their ideas. Most sounded impressive at first, but failed when tested. He expected the same from Marcus. "A concept is not the same as a proven solution," Richard said. His voice carried across the room. "A competition like this measures results, not possibilities." Marcus looked toward him. "I agree, sir." Richard seemed surprised by the answer. "You do?" Marcus nodded. "That is why I wanted the chance to test it." The response was calm, respectful, and direct. It was not a challenge, it was a request for fairness. The judges prepared the demonstration area. The final challenge required each robot to navigate a simulated emergency environment, identify changing conditions, and complete a rescue support task. The previous teams had powerful machines with advanced equipment. They had large screens, professional presentations, and years of institutional support behind them. Marcus had ARIS and a small remote controller he had built himself. When the first teams began, the room filled with excitement. Their robots moved quickly through the course, but each one faced unexpected problems. Some struggled to adjust when the environment changed. Others followed their original programming but could not adapt when new information appeared. The audience watched as the experts analyzed every result. Richard remained confident. "This is exactly why experience matters," he said quietly to another executive beside him. "Technology must perform under pressure." Then Marcus's name appeared on the screen. The room became quiet. Marcus placed ARIS at the starting point. The small machine looked different from the others. It did not have the polished exterior or corporate design. Its surface showed the marks of countless repairs and improvements. But every part had a purpose. Marcus stepped back. The timer began. At first, nothing dramatic happened. ARIS moved slowly. Some people in the audience looked disappointed. A few whispered that the machine was too simple. Marcus heard them, but he kept his eyes on the screen. He knew the robot was not built to impress people. It was built to solve problems. Then the environment changed. The challenge introduced a new obstacle that had not appeared in the earlier demonstrations. The advanced systems paused, searching for instructions. ARIS stopped for only a moment. Its sensors adjusted. Its processing system analyzed the new information. Then it changed direction. The room became quieter. The robot was no longer following a prepared path. It was making decisions. One engineer leaned forward. "That is not a standard response pattern." Another checked the data. "It is adapting in real time." Marcus watched the screen without moving. Behind him, Emily covered her mouth with both hands, watching her son's dream move across the competition floor. Richard slowly stood from his seat. For the first time that day, the confidence in his expression disappeared. He was not looking at a teenager anymore. He was looking at a creator. ARIS continued through the course, solving each new challenge with careful precision. The machine that had been removed from the competition list was now doing something none of the experts expected. It was showing them a different definition of innovation. And as the final seconds counted down, everyone in the room realized the same thing. Marcus Carter had not entered the competition to prove he belonged. He had entered to show what they had failed to see. The final seconds of the demonstration felt longer than anyone expected. The large screen above the competition floor displayed the progress of ARIS. As the robot moved through the final stage of the challenge, the room that had once been filled with quiet laughter and doubtful whispers was now completely still. Engineers leaned forward. Judges watched every movement. Even the teams who had arrived with advanced equipment and years of support behind them had stopped preparing. They were watching Marcus Carter's creation. Marcus stood beside the control station, his hands resting calmly at his sides. Inside, his heart was racing, but his expression remained focused. He knew this moment was not just about winning a competition. It was about every person who had ever been told they were not qualified before they were even given a chance. ARIS reached the final section of the course. The system detected a new challenge, analyzed the environment, and adjusted its approach. The machine moved with careful precision, not because it had been given every answer, but because Marcus had designed it to learn. A quiet sound came from the audience as the final result appeared on the screen. Completed. The hall remained silent for a few seconds. Then the reaction began. "That is impossible," one engineer whispered. Another looked at the data display. "No, it is not impossible. It is just something we did not expect." Richard Whitmore remained standing near the front row. The confidence that had been on his face earlier was gone. He looked from the screen to Marcus, then back to the robot. For years, Richard had studied technology built by famous companies and respected institutions. He knew the language of innovation. He knew the names behind the greatest inventions, but standing in front of him was something he had not prepared for. A 16-year-old boy from Detroit had created a system that solved a problem many experienced engineers had struggled with. The judges reviewed the results again. They checked the performance records. They examined the system logs. Every number confirmed the same thing. ARIS had succeeded because of its design, not because of its appearance, funding, or reputation. One of the judges approached Marcus. "How long did it take you to build this?" he asked. Marcus looked at the robot for a moment before answering. 3 years. 3 years? The judge repeated. Marcus nodded. "I started with broken parts and old electronics. I just kept improving it." The judge looked toward the other machines surrounding the room. They were impressive creations built with professional equipment and large teams. But Marcus's robot carried something different. It carried persistence. Richard slowly walked toward the demonstration area. The crowd became quiet again. Everyone watched the man who had questioned whether Marcus belonged. "Mr. Carter," Richard said, "your system performed beyond expectations." Marcus looked at him carefully. "Thank you, sir." Richard studied the robot's design. "Where did you learn to build something like this?" Marcus answered honestly. "Everywhere I could. Books, online lessons, old machines. My mom taught me how to repair electronics. Mostly, I learned by not giving up when something failed." Those words stayed in the air. They were simple, but they carried the weight of years that nobody in the room had seen. Richard looked down briefly. For the first time, he considered that his definition of talent might have been incomplete. A person did not become brilliant because they had access to the best resources. Sometimes they became brilliant because they found a way forward without them. Across the room, Emily watched her son with tears of pride in her eyes. She remembered the small garage in Detroit. She remembered the nights when Marcus sat alone with wires, tools, and sketches, wondering if anyone would ever believe in his idea. Now the same people who ignored him were studying his work. But Marcus was not looking for revenge. He was not interested in proving anyone wrong. He only wanted people to understand what technology could do when it was created with purpose. Then something unexpected happened. One of the event coordinators rushed toward Richard with a concerned expression. "Mr. Whitmore, there is something you need to see." Richard turned. The coordinator held a tablet showing old records connected to ARIS. Richard looked confused. "What is this?" The coordinator hesitated. "It is connected to a rescue technology report from Detroit 6 months ago." Richard's expression changed. "Detroit?" The coordinator nodded. "The prototype that helped during that emergency situation. The one nobody could identify." Richard looked back at Marcus. For a moment, the noise of the competition disappeared. A memory he had forgotten began to return. A piece of technology he once searched for. A creation that had helped someone he loved. And now, standing only a few feet away, was the person who had built it. The competition hall slowly returned to its normal rhythm, but something had changed. The bright screens still displayed rankings. The machines from the other teams still stood beneath the lights. The audience still filled the seats around the demonstration floor. Yet the energy in the room was different. The attention was no longer focused on the biggest companies or the most expensive technology. It was focused on one teenager from Detroit and the small robot standing beside him. Marcus Carter looked at the tablet in the event coordinator's hand. He noticed the way Richard Whitmore's expression had changed. The confidence was gone. The certainty was gone. Something from the past had suddenly connected with the present. "What rescue technology report?" Richard asked quietly. The coordinator handed him the tablet. On the screen was a report from 6 months earlier. The location was Detroit, Michigan. The incident involved an emergency response situation where a prototype device had helped guide rescuers and provide critical support. The creator had never been identified. The only information recorded was the system name, ARIS. Richard's eyes moved across the report. He recognized the details, the adaptive system, the unusual response pattern. The technology that had helped his daughter Sophie during a difficult moment when traditional solutions were not enough. "No," Richard whispered. "That cannot be the same system." Marcus stood nearby, confused by the reaction. He had never met Richard before this competition. He had never told anyone at the event about the early prototype. He had never connected his invention to the Whitmore family. "Mr. Whitmore?" Marcus asked. Richard looked up slowly. For the first time, he was not looking at a competitor. He was looking at the person behind a moment that had deeply affected his family. "Did you create this version of ARIS?" Richard asked. Marcus nodded. "Yes, sir." "Did you build an earlier prototype in Detroit?" Marcus paused. He remembered the months of testing before the competition. He remembered the day when his experimental system had been used outside his garage. He had never expected anyone important to notice. "Yes," Marcus said, "but I did not think anyone knew." The room became quiet again. Emily stepped closer, watching the conversation carefully. She knew her son had always focused on helping people, not receiving recognition. Marcus had never built ARIS for awards or attention. He built it because he believed technology should have a purpose. Richard looked back at the report. The words on the screen felt different now. 6 months earlier, he had been searching for the person behind the technology that helped his daughter. He had spoken with engineers. He had contacted companies. He had looked through professional networks. He never imagined the creator would be a 16-year-old standing in a competition hall, carrying a notebook filled with handwritten ideas. "Why did you never tell anyone?" Richard asked. Marcus looked surprised by the question. "Because it was not about me." His answer was simple. "The goal was to make something useful. I just wanted it to work." Those words stayed with Richard. He had spent years surrounded by people who talked about innovation as a business opportunity. Marcus talked about it as a way to help others. The difference was impossible to ignore. Sophie, who had been watching from the front row, walked closer to her father. "Dad," she said softly, "is this the robot that helped us?" Richard looked at Marcus, then nodded. "Yes." Sophie smiled at Marcus. "Thank you for making something that helps people." Marcus looked at her and gave a small smile. "I am glad it helped." There was no pride in his voice, no desire to make anyone feel guilty, only kindness. The same kindness that had been present in every step of his journey. Around them, the experts who had dismissed Marcus earlier remained silent. They had expected a teenager with a dream. They found a young inventor with a purpose. They expected a machine that looked unfinished. They found technology built with patience and vision. Richard slowly looked around the hall. The same place where Marcus had been judged by his background was now the place where the truth had become impossible to ignore. He looked at Marcus and finally understood the mistake he had made. He had searched for greatness in famous places, but greatness had been standing in front of him the entire time. The silence inside the competition hall lasted longer than anyone expected. The giant screens above the stage continued displaying the final results, but nobody was looking at the rankings anymore. The attention of the entire room had shifted to Marcus Carter, the 16-year-old inventor who had arrived with a small robot and a simple goal. He had not entered the competition with a famous university behind him. He had not arrived with a team of engineers or a company logo. He had arrived with an idea, a machine, and years of determination. Richard Whitmore stood in front of him, holding the tablet that revealed the truth he never expected to find. The technology he once searched for was not created by a large research company. It was not developed by a team of experienced professionals. It was created by a teenager who built his first prototype in a Detroit garage. Richard looked at Marcus differently now. The judgment that had been present earlier was replaced by something quieter, recognition. "Marcus," Richard said, his voice lower than before, "why did you never come forward after the Detroit report?" Marcus looked down briefly at ARIS. "Because nobody needed to know my name," he replied. The important part was that the system helped. The answer surprised everyone nearby. Many young inventors dreamed of recognition. Marcus had focused only on the purpose behind his creation. Richard looked around the room. The same experts who had questioned Marcus's place in the competition were now standing beside their own assumptions. They had measured intelligence through education, history, financial support, and reputation. They had never considered that a teenager working in a small garage could create something meaningful. One of the senior engineers approached Marcus and studied the robot carefully. "Your adaptive learning model is different from the usual approach," he said. "How did you design it?" Marcus explained the process calmly. "I wanted the robot to respond to situations, not just follow instructions. Real problems do not always happen exactly the way we expect." The engineer nodded slowly. "That is a very advanced way to think about technology," Marcus simply answered. "I think technology should think about people first." Those words traveled through the room. They were not complicated. They were not designed to impress anyone. But they carried the same message that had guided Marcus from the beginning. The purpose of innovation was not only to create something impressive, it was to create something useful. Richard looked towards Sophie, who was still standing nearby. His daughter watched Marcus with admiration. She did not see the teenager others had dismissed. She saw the person who built something that helped her family. Richard realized that his first mistake was not misunderstanding a machine. It was misunderstanding a person. "Marcus," Richard said, "I owe you an apology." The room became quiet. Nobody expected those words from a man known for his confidence and influence. Marcus looked at him without anger. "You believed what you saw," Marcus said. Richard shook his head slightly. "No, I believed what I assumed." The honesty of the statement surprised everyone. Richard continued, "I saw your age. I saw your background. I saw what you did not have. I never stopped to ask what you had created." Marcus remained silent. He understood that an apology did not erase what happened, but he also understood the importance of someone admitting they were wrong. Around them, the atmosphere changed completely. The competition that had started with doubt was ending with a lesson that no presentation could teach. A person's value was not determined by where they studied, how much money supported them, or how many people already believed in them. Later that afternoon, the judges announced that Marcus's project would receive special recognition for innovation and real-world impact. The announcement filled the hall with applause. Emily Carter watched her son walk back onto the stage, remembering the small garage where this journey began. She remembered the old tools, the late nights, and the moments when Marcus wondered if anyone would ever understand his vision. Now, thousands of miles away from that garage, people finally saw what she had always seen. Marcus was not just a talented young inventor. He was proof that brilliant ideas could come from anywhere. As the cameras captured the moment, Marcus stood beside A.R.E.S. under the bright lights of the competition floor. He did not raise a trophy above his head. He did not look for revenge against those who doubted him. He simply looked at his creation and smiled. Because the greatest victory was never making others feel wrong. It was showing them what was possible. The morning after the competition, the city of Chicago moved at its usual pace. Cars crossed the streets beneath the tall buildings. People rushed toward their jobs. The world outside the McCormick Place Convention Center continued as if nothing unusual had happened. But inside the building, one story remained the center of every conversation. The young inventor from Detroit, who arrived with a small robot, had changed the way people looked at talent. Marcus Carter stood near the large windows of the convention center, watching the city skyline, while ARIS rested beside him on a small display table. The robot was no longer seen as an unfinished project. It was now recognized as a breakthrough in adaptive rescue technology. Yet Marcus still looked at it the same way he always had. Not as a trophy, not as a symbol of success, as a tool created to help people. Behind him, footsteps approached. Richard Whitmore walked into the room carrying a folder filled with documents. His expression was different from the first day they met. The confidence was still there, but something else had replaced the distance. "Respect." "Marcus," Richard said, "do you have a moment?" Marcus turned and nodded. Richard placed the folder on the table. Inside were plans, research opportunities, and invitations from several technology organizations interested in working with Marcus. "These are opportunities you deserve," Richard explained. Marcus looked through the pages quietly. A few months earlier, receiving something like this would have seemed impossible. But instead of excitement, he felt something else: responsibility. "There are a lot of people smarter than me who never get a chance," Marcus said. Richard listened carefully. "What do you mean?" Marcus looked at ARIS. "I mean, there are kids who have ideas, but nobody listens because they do not have the right school, the right connections, or the right resources." Richard became silent. The words reminded him of his own mistake. He had spent years searching for the next great inventor while overlooking people who did not fit his expectations. "You are right," Richard finally said, "and that needs to change." Later that day, Richard returned to the main stage of the convention center for a special announcement. Hundreds of attendees gathered again. Engineers, students, investors, and technology leaders filled the room. Marcus stood nearby with Emily and Sophie. The large screen behind the stage displayed images of ARIS and the journey that brought it there. Richard stepped forward. "Yesterday, I made a mistake," he began. The room became quiet. "I judged a creator before understanding his creation. I looked at background before looking at ability." Many people in the audience listened carefully. Richard continued, "Innovation does not belong to one type of person, one neighborhood, or one institution. Great ideas can come from anywhere. Our responsibility is to recognize them. Marcus watched quietly. He never expected someone like Richard Whitmore to say those words publicly. He knew an apology could not change the past, but he also knew that a person admitting a mistake could change the future. After the announcement, several young students approached Marcus. They asked questions about robotics, programming, and how he started building machines. One teenager from Illinois asked, "How did you know you could actually do this?" Marcus smiled. "I did not always know. I just kept learning." The answer was simple, but the students understood it. Success was not created in one perfect moment. It was built through patience, curiosity, and the courage to continue when nobody was watching. Before leaving Chicago, Marcus returned to the empty competition floor where everything had started. The lights were softer now. The noise was gone. The space where he had once stood feeling invisible was now quiet. He placed his hand gently on ARIS and remembered the moment when he was asked to leave. He remembered the disappointment, the doubt, the feeling that nobody wanted to hear him. But he also remembered his mother's words. "One room does not decide your worth." Outside, Emily waited near the entrance. She looked at her son and smiled. "Ready to go home?" she asked. Marcus looked back at the convention hall one last time. "Yeah," he said, "but I think I want to build something new first." Emily laughed softly. That was Marcus. Even after recognition, even after success, his mind was already thinking about the next problem he could solve. And somewhere in that quiet moment, a new chapter began. Not with a spotlight, not with applause, just with a young inventor, a simple idea, and the belief that technology was meant to bring people together. 1 year later, the sound of machines filled a small community technology center on the east side of Detroit, Michigan. The room was nothing like the massive halls of international competitions. There were no giant screens, no expensive displays, no teams wearing matching uniforms. Just a simple workshop with wooden tables, old computers, tools, and young students sitting together with curiosity in their eyes. In the center of the room stood Marcus Carter, now 17 years old, adjusting a small robotic arm while a group of students watched closely. The same hands that once built ARIS from recycled parts were now helping others believe they could build something too. "Do you think someone like me can create something important?" a young student asked. Marcus looked up from the machine and smiled. He recognized that question. He had carried the same doubt years earlier. "I think anyone can create something important," Marcus answered. "The first step is believing that your ideas deserve a chance." On the wall behind him was a photograph from the International Robotics Championship in Chicago. It showed Marcus standing beside ARIS, beneath the bright competition lights. But for Marcus, the picture was not a reminder of winning. It was a reminder of a lesson about judgment, patience, and the power of being given an opportunity. After the competition, Marcus's journey continued in ways he never expected. Technology companies reached out. Universities invited him to speak. Young inventors from different states sent messages asking how they could begin creating their own projects. But Marcus never forgot where he started. He still returned to the same Detroit neighborhood where his dreams began. He still visited the garage where he built his first prototype. The small space looked different now. There were more tools, better equipment, and shelves filled with robotics materials donated by people who believed in his mission. Yet one corner remained untouched. The old workbench where Marcus first designed ARIS was still there. Scratches covered the surface. Small marks from years of experiments remained visible. To Marcus, those imperfections represented something valuable. They represented the process, the mistakes, the lessons, the moments when giving up would have been easier. One afternoon, Richard Whitmore visited the Technology Center. The man who once believed innovation belonged only to elite institutions now stood among students from different backgrounds, listening to their ideas. He watched Marcus guide them with patience and understanding. "You changed more than a competition," Richard said quietly. Marcus looked at him. "What do you mean?" Richard looked around the room. "You showed people that talent is not something we should search for only in familiar places. Sometimes talent is already there. We just need to recognize it." Marcus smiled. He knew Richard had changed. Not because Marcus defeated him, not because he embarrassed him, but because someone was willing to learn. The greatest change did not happen when Marcus proved others wrong. It happened when people became willing to see differently. Years after that first competition, ARIS, became a symbol of accessible technology and creative problem-solving. But Marcus always rejected the idea that the robot was created by a genius working alone. He credited his mother, Emily, who supported his curiosity. He credited the teachers, books, and communities that helped him learn. He credited every person who encouraged him when the world was uncertain. One evening, as the sun lowered over Detroit, Marcus stood outside the technology center holding a small version of his original notebook. The pages were older now. The ink had faded in places. But the first sentence he wrote years ago was still clear. Build something that helps someone who needs it. The wind moved gently through the street as children inside the center continued working on their own inventions. Marcus watched the lights from the workshop glow through the windows. A quiet smile appeared on his face. The boy who once stood outside a room where people doubted him had created a place where others could walk in and be believed. And in that simple moment, there was no competition, no judgment, no need for approval, only the quiet sound of new ideas beginning. Because sometimes history is not changed by the people who already have everything. Sometimes it is changed by the person who keeps building, even when nobody is watching.